Okay, good afternoon all. My name is Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and this is
Sebastian DeRosa. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And this is the Alchemy of the Mind podcast. And I think we're going to have a nice conversation about culture today, right? Yeah,
Counterculture.
counterculture. So you and I have been chatting for a number of months now, honestly, about what we both perceive to be shifts in culture.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we've consistently discussed, and it's been brought up here a little bit kind of in a very small way, but maybe we can expand today. One of the things that's been discussed is the idea that it seems like countercultures, which were usually small, not very loud, not very impactful groups, are now all of a sudden finding themselves in the spotlight and are getting all sorts of power and a larger voice and are even kind of dictating societal norms nowadays, it seems. So why don't you tell me what you think about that and why these things started to shift?
Well, I think the shift, I think it really that started to happen. It was happening gradually. And then I think around 2016, I think it got a little boost with the Trump presidency. I just think the fear, and again, right, the rigid tribalism. So people started to, I don't know, I feel like the media changed then too.
Okay.
I think the media and the tech actually probably play a huge role in, because Google's bias, and how they deliver the information, and now information delivery became kind of standardized across tech.
Okay.
Did you get that statement?
Yeah, no, I got it. There's like four good things in there, so I want to see if we can pull them all apart. So the first thing I heard you say was the fact that Trump got elected or was causing a stir shifted the energy in the country, at least, and in the world. And then the second thing I heard was the idea that everyone became more afraid and kind of.
And I would say that's not so much Trump, but what the reaction to Trump. Let's say that.
Right, because there's a little bit of distance between what he does and how people react. Not to say that he's a peaceful Dalai Lama-like character, because he's clearly not in any way, shape, or form.
Didn't you know that the Dalai Lama is now racist?
I saw something on Twitter about that. I was like, of course he is. Yeah. Anyway, so the first two things were Trump getting into office and whatever his character and his movement means. The second thing was fear, making us more rigid in how we identify. And the third thing was news media changing. And the fourth thing was technology. Those were the four kind of, let's say, variables that have caused this shift from mainstream culture being predominant and then now counterculture having a louder voice and more, let's say, financial real estate.
Well, look at how it flipped too, with like now who's being, before it was the gays, being, criticized and kind of ostracized by the media. Now it's like the Christians, which is, again, this thing probably plays part on which area, but I think across the culture within like tech and online.
Right. Yeah. I think that there's some kind of shift away from the 90s when Christian conservative culture was definitely in charge. And people, like you said, like Pat Robertson, et cetera, had such a huge impact on the world. Whereas now it's almost like pandering to gay people has become the new pandering to Christians.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And then the gay people have become like the new, the born again Christians, basically.
And it seems like that. That was our discussion the other day about gay pride parades and whatnot.
Yeah, and the social justice people.
Yeah.
Because I remember that in the 90s when people, everyone was offended by everything and they wanted to, silence this music, or kind of around the time after the Satanic Panic. Panic.
Love it.
My friend Frankie, who's amazing, my hairdresser, she said that's going to be their band name, Satanic Panic, because she watched our last episode.
That's funny. That's super funny. I'm glad. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if we can slice and dice the four things. So what, in your estimation, is the reasonable, let's say, force that Trump and his movement, the MAGA people, had on society? What were the shifts that movement was encouraging?
That movement wasn't, well, I guess, I'm trying to think of, It's just that movement was encouraging. No.
Like, what were the goals?
Oh, like America First.
Okay.
Focusing more, I feel like in a way focusing more on that, maybe nationalism and that shared, like identifying as a shared, that homogeneity, within like, kind of finding that common ground with one another, which I feel like is what, as the shifted, people started like identifying with all their different groups, which then in turn has divided people. And so I think part of MAGA and the Trump thing was like, let's look at what we share as Americans. But then I feel like on that side, because I was of that belief, that was viewed as like, a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like a shame, and focus on the shadow of America versus, the light or the positive or negative, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Just a simple counterpoint that I think might just add a little either context or might be frivolous. I don't know. I'm thinking, because I've had this conversation a lot with patients. I've had this conversation a lot with friends and colleagues. It seems like there's a part of people, using terminology like the shadow, there's a part of people that have felt so ashamed, back to our discussion about gay pride and whatever. I think because people have felt so ashamed for so long, they started to identify with the part that is ostracized, whether it's their skin color, their sexual orientation, their immigrant status, whatever it is. And I think people have been so, let's say, fed up with people being shamed for these things, that because there's this person like Donald Trump and this movement that says, let's be homogenous, let's be nationalistic, let's get rid of individual difference, let's just, work as a team, let's, this is obviously my best possible interpretation of the MAGA world, right?
Yeah.
So let's do all this homogenizing and let's do all this nationalist kind of behavior when you've been starved for recognition for so long because of a piece of your identity. I think it's perfectly natural for people to overreact and go, what the fuck?
Oh, for sure. And I grew up thinking that, and being gay, that's how I felt towards, like, I wouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance as a little kid in school before. I think I got that from my dad, but I mean, I'd had a very, and then I'd reinforced my belief about America with, and I don't know if school really enforced that, but I think my experience being rejected by culture, by the culture around me as a kid, maybe added to that because that culture represented America.
Yeah. I think
and then as I got older and I went into media, I definitely watched, like the movies I liked and stuff. Definitely, it's interesting now to look back and go, oh, those really influenced that kind of, anti-America, pro, like, oh, other places in the world are better, and the desire for the exotic.
Right. Sure. I also think that we can add another layer, because we had 4 parts. Maybe we can add a 5th part. I think that what was happening kind of historically was the post, young George Bush era world was one where we're really pushing hard for like modern civil rights and kind of the cultural shift towards identity politics that were favorable for people who were more liberally minded and individually minded, thanks to, I think, Obama being in office and things like that. I think there was a shift post 9/11 into the Obama territory where we became more liberal in orientation, and that had like a bigger microphone because of him and because of his initiatives and because of the people who were in charge in politics and all this stuff. And then the people who were more conservative and more nationalistic got fed up with that, as always happens. Things shift back and forth.
Yeah.
And then out comes our buddy Trump, and now we have this counter movement. So this movement that had power all of a sudden was losing power. The liberal identity politics movement that was gaining lots of power under him now started to lose power because who was just killing it on the campaign trail and getting people to like outwardly expose the fact that they're kind of interested in nationalism, even if it wasn't in the Nazi sense nationalism, it was nationalism.
Yeah.
So then one movement loses power, the MAGA movement gains power, and now both are fighting. That's kind of another, I think, level of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things too is I feel like there was almost a point where it could have been balancing out, you know, but I feel like that's when it kind of like, it flipped and it became like the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its tail, which is like where it, because it's weird because so many of these ideas that were like liberal and progressive have become authoritarian, and the control, oriented and very Orwellian to a point that's like, to me is wild that people wouldn't see that, and be like, but then again, I think we also have a whole new level of group think and group identity going on because again of these factors like, fear, tech, all this kind of wrapped into a little bubble.
Yeah,
because I feel like there were so many people before who didn't trust the media, but then when the media started bashing on Donald Trump, they were like, oh, they're great now. And it's like, no, it's all biased.
Right. And it's always been that way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I used to think that Fox was just the, evil Fox. And, so that's the interesting thing is to have come from there to wherever it is now. I don't even know. I don't need a place.
Right.
Yeah, because that's that thing, because you realize that, I mean, how much these things are the same.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's why they can kind of flip spots.
Yeah, I think that's natural. I think that allows us to maybe express a concern or express an underlying issue that we don't know how to deal with otherwise. Let's say, excessive going overboard, excessive protesting, the Antifa people, etc. It really speaks to a sense of desperation and fear on the left side of the spectrum that, I don't think has existed for a long time in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to kind of put all this together because of the 5 things we've mentioned. There's a historical kind of political thing with the liberal mindset gaining power, and then the conservative nationalist mindset gaining power, and now the dramatic overreaction thanks to both kind of the nature, I think, of the MAGA movement in terms of I'm not going to be fucked with, I guess would be the best colloquial way I could encapsulate it.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be the spirit that our buddy Trump was running on. It seemed like he was the first real brawler that the conservatives had in a long time.
Yeah.
And I think because he's a brawler, I think rightfully deserves some criticism for kind of the brawler-esque mentality on both sides of the political aisle. I mean, it's to the point where Lindsey Graham is now a brawler, and he never was in the Senate.
And I kind of like what we talked about pre-discussion was the whole immaturity thing, and like what you're seeing with people in the DNC and tagging and people, and how AOC is like the Trump of the left, right? And maybe that's that thing is he kind of initiated this like scrappy, say whatever, which is in a way a reflection of America, and it's a reflection of all this political correctness and identity politics that was like becoming this control that people are like, what? Screw this! You can't even enjoy comedy now because someone's offended,
Yeah.
So maybe that's, and so it's kind of that like that law of attraction where like attracts like. And then that's kind of made it and then of course the media is just as trashy as Trump, if not worse, because the media at least wants to propagate the fear.
Yeah,
I don't think he may propagate fear in people because of the media, like in their kind of their spin on just like the social media thing that just happened, the one that Tim went to.
Oh yeah,
people went to at the White House, and the media just made it like look like it's this alt-right convention.
Right. I mean the creator of minds.com was on there.
Didn't they call him a Nazi?
Probably, I don't even know. But I mean, if you look at the guy, there's not a goddamn thing about him that screams Nazi. He looks like a dirty hippie. Bill is as close to a dirty hippie as you can get. So I don't get how they get that. I mean, his His tie wasn't even very tight, wasn't tied well. He looked he looked raggedy. I'm so glad he has created the platform, but it's just, there's nothing about him that screams Nazi at all.
Well, and that's that thing though. I really do think, I don't know if the media used to have more integrity or when that started to really flip, if it really was, was Trump when it just went up to a higher volume, but it was doing that all through, Bush. I don't know. Because I never fucking cared. I mean, I knew all media was bullshit.
Yeah.
But I thought, because I was gay and I'd go to the human rights campaign and vote for whoever they said to vote for, right? Like, because this is the far left, I just didn't realize that. I used to say I'm as far left as possible. I didn't realize what that meant. Yeah. I didn't realize the connection of the circle, of the snake that eats its tail, and it's the same thing. And maybe that's what it comes down to, is that I feel like we're in a time where we're learning that everything is nuanced.
Yep.
Everything is both. It's like, kind of I've been discussing about like vegetables, and these different things are like, this is just healthy. But it's like, well, no, sometimes things that are, marketed to us and told are healthy, kale can cause, kidney stones from oxalic acid, too much kale, so it's like, everything is nuanced.
Right. And I think one of the problems, so I think the fourth thing was the social media thing, or no, the fourth thing was news. The fifth thing was tech. So let's go to tech, because I think tech has created a set of expectations insidiously. So slowly but surely, insidiously over time, as we've had more exposure to instantaneous connection through Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all these things, I think we have slowly conditioned our minds and our expectations towards less depth in content, less nuance, more superficial, more flash. Because you can't have a whole lot of depth and nuance in a 100-something characters on Twitter, etc. You can't have a whole lot of nuance in one picture or one post on Instagram. You can't have a lot of nuance in a Snapchat picture, right? So I think we've slowly and subtly, what I would describe as insidiously, conditioned our minds to not be interested in nuance, to be interested in immediate gratification, to be interested in a sense of, well, this is what clickbaity thing resonates with me. It really has capitalized on our instinct for, let's say, quickly understanding which social signals are dangerous, because that's like half of what our brain does. It's
like
threat.
Basic bitches.
Sure, whatever that means.
No, like basic, like that primal kind of like a meme and a response to just like these quick emotional responses versus, and that's really permeated culture.
Yeah.
To a point to where, there's people who go online and that's literally all they do.
Is meme.
Yeah. So to think that, and no, they're enjoyable much of the time, but it is weird to think of the culture kind of going, there's like it is like the chaos, right? It's like the lack of order.
Yes.
It's like there is that shift. I would say definitely with tech too, we're in a total time of chaos. And tech is a huge aspect of the chaos.
So then where does the order come in? Are we going to self-initiate the order, or are we going to have some larger, more powerful force create order? Because that seems to be the trend in history, right? Is when there's a lot of chaos in any domain in life, typically speaking, unless there are concerted efforts by small groups, a large orderly body like the government, etc., tends to step in and create order on behalf of the people.
I don't think it can now. I think it will have to, there'll be, like we discussed digital detox last time. I think there's going to be people who go, fuck this, who change how they're receiving information and how they're interacting with society. And then there'll be the people who just get fucking hardwired into the computers and, so I think there'll just be there'll be more of a division, but I think because the government is so tied into the focus on success at any cost, I think the government will go more towards the tech because of the control and the surveillance and all this stuff that's offered by tech. I just think the government is wrapped in with tech to such a degree, I don't,
Hmm.
you know, and maybe if that continues happening and there's more chaos, yeah, then maybe the order of like martial law and, you know, things like that will, because of the chaos, will be brought in. But I think that'll be kind of a separate thing from the rest, if that makes sense.
Would it be fair to say that the censorship that's currently happening on platforms like Facebook, Twitter, etc., is the martial law?
The what?
Martial law?
Oh, that's happening in a way. I mean, I think martial law is more like, you know, a physical.
Oh,
You know, like when martial law is brought in, when things are like in physical chaos in a place.
like in Portland.
Yeah. Portland might need martial law, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's a form. I mean, what's happening, and you know, it's like Google's whole mission, they've just lost their because of their derangement in general. I think I mean, their whole mission used to be do no evil or whatever. Now it's like they are outright blatantly evil, but they think they're fighting evil,
which is weird.
And that's a difference too of like how, you know, like conservatives or whatever that spectrum view, like, you know, the far left side is insane, but the far left side views them as evil.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's why I've been like throwing around Nazi, you know.
I think maybe to shift it towards the more positive. So there's 5 things that have happened that got us to this point where culture has shifted. So I think the more positive view is, okay, what can be done in a reasonable sense at, let's say, the grassroots change, like people having conversation level of activity, that would keep it from anyone needing to have someone like a Donald Trump or a Barack Obama of any sort for us to right the ship. Like what could we do culturally to keep from swinging to political extremes or is that just inevitable over time?
I think the media has to be held accountable.
Okay.
I think people need to start, like, stop being afraid to speak out. Because I think we also get this time where like people, like if they're Trump supporters or if they have like a dissenting viewpoint, at least in certain places, you know, of course I'm in Seattle where, you know, there are not voices of dissent. Like we were talking about earlier, pre-discussion, how, you know, in LA, there are more voices of dissent, but like Seattle and Portland, there are none. And when people try, like there was a guy a few years ago in Ballard who went to run, you know, for city council. And he was just slightly probably libertarianish, you know, nothing, you know, too conservative even. And he was harassed. His family was threatened. He had to pull out. And they're like that here. I mean, there's these guys online, Operation Cold Front, have been going around Seattle, like on the Hill, which is the gay neighborhood, and doing like a Trump support, like hug a Trump supporter. And they've been assaulted. Like the bars won't let them in the bars. Like just insane.
Wow.
Insane thinking. And they're not even, and they're both persons of color, but they're Nazis by Seattle Antifa standards.
I think it was Joy Villa that just got yelled at in a subway in New York or something because she was wearing a pro-Trump pin or something today. So it happens a lot. One thing I was thinking that I think applies to this is it's to your point about maybe more people speaking their mind. I think that's extremely valuable, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. And the perfect proof of that is that I think the 2nd District Court or something just said that Trump can't block anyone on Twitter or something like that. Oh, this
is a great thing, yeah.
Because, again, the answer to problematic speech is more speech, not less speech, right? So no matter what side of the aisle it's been, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled in favor of people saying ridiculous things. This is a point I made in my hate speech video months ago, is that the Supreme Court has always ruled, for some strange reason, in favor of people saying and doing ridiculous things up to a limit of, you know, preventing actual violence, because it works. And what we see in all the data, all the social sciences data, is that hate crimes go down, violence goes down, experiences of prejudice go down, the more people say and express themselves, because A, we figure out which are the sick fucks that don't need to be socially reinforced anymore, the Richard Spencers of the world, and then B, we figure out which voices that are reasonable but concerning or confusing, how to have a conversation with them, because we need those people who are reasonable, confusing, odd, undetermined to speak, because they have a perspective that's outside of this, bifurcated narrative that everyone has to live in, the conservative, the liberal, the right, the left, the right, the wrong, stupid narrative that we tend to operate in.
Yeah.
I think that's why we need more people contributing. We need more people on Twitter. We need more people on minds.com. We need more people everywhere.
Well, we need more dialogue in general. And I think that's like, with my one meetup I've created, Politically Homeless. It's really interesting because when people join, they answer a few different questions. Like, can you have a nuanced conversation? You can either be pro-Trump or anti-Trump, but you need to be able to be, cool with both views. And it's always interesting because in people, that is the common thread, is that people are like, we don't get to discuss stuff anymore.
Yeah.
People have this thing, and they are feeling politically homeless because both these options, don't work. And maybe that's what we need to get rid of. But of course, that's ingrained in this like fucking corrupt system.
Well, it's ingrained in the political system that we have this bifurcated right-left. I also think it's partially ingrained in our instincts. Jordan Peterson talks about conservatives having, more of a need for order. And the research shows, for instance, that conservatives score higher on measures of need for closure, which I talked about in my adaptive group identification and politics video. Much higher on measures of need for closure than liberals. And so it's somewhat built into our DNA to a degree that we might be more temperamentally open-minded or might be more temperamentally closed-minded, or our need for a certainty. So if you're one of those people who's more open-minded, you might need less or you might have less of a need for certainty about topics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more conservative in temperament, then you might have a stronger need for closure and simplicity in things. So figuring out how to, I think, short circuit the need for extremes, I think that's probably the most productive conversation we and anyone else in the world could have, is how do we make sure the extremes are the least important, and the people that are somewhat in from the extremes, who are confused or trying to figure out what's going on, have more power.
Well, that's the thing. And because of the nature of humans, do they need, does that need something, like people have called before the new center, or all these different names, because we've just and nothing's necessarily stuck within that. Yeah. Right. But do people need that? Like some way to identify, I think a lot of people do. I think there's a lot of people that don't, but then the people that don't, like very libertarian minded people, generally that doesn't get steam behind something because everybody's like individual.
Yeah.
And there's power in group numbers. So it's kind of making that work together is complicated.
Right. And this is something I talked about in my book a little bit. We live in this weird time of being so aware and so socially connected that now we are faced with actually reconciling how we're designed with how our culture is built. So because we have this, we're all built differently, right? We're all either more or less open-minded, etc. We need to understand the extent to which we need to be more individualistic. So if you're more introverted or extroverted, etc. But I also think we need to understand the degree to which we need to be interconnected with groups or tribes so that we can efficiently function in a society. Mm-hmm. So the real trick for me, from my point of view that I talked about, was how do we balance out the dialectical tension between I need to be alone and have my own voice and I need to be part of. And if we can start living in the world of what I call dialectical tension, which psychology researchers talked about for a long time. It's not my concept, but it's just the one that I think is most apropos.
You said dialectical tension?
Yeah, just dialectical tension. The opposing forces and the counterpoints, how do we live in this dialectical tension and resolve it? This is where DBT therapy gets all of its weight and works so efficiently for, people who have borderline personality disorder and all this stuff. Is there's this extreme set of emotion and intensity on both sides of the person's psyche that we have to be able to live in the middle mindfully somehow. So living in the dialectical tension of the opposing forces is where the centrists, I guess, get to start kind of doing their work and gain more power, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Well, and it's that perception too is so broad, You know, like
Uh-huh.
what would be a centrist versus the new center is completely different things. Because I've heard people say like Hillary Clinton was a centrist.
Huh.
Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard
Or
that.
that was kind of centrist for, you know, was I knew some centrist people for Clinton, which is just, you know,
Huh.
insane.
Well, again, I think that one of the major problems that we all face as humans is that we're all kind of collectively hallucinating and delusioning all day long. We have our subjective experience of what's happening, but reality is usually somewhere in between what we think is happening and what the world is experiencing.
Well,
So,
that's that never-ending nuance, right? And that's I think, and that's why, like, you know, being woke isn't like waking up is a constant process.
yes.
You know, because of realizing that nature of duality, that's like this constant like state of flux of, you know, does that, you know what I mean, where it's fluxing between the two always.
Yeah.
Which is weird before, because I would have thought of that idea and been like, oh, I get that, you know, or the idea of duality. But now I do get it because of what we, you know, the experience we've been brought through, which I think in some ways, you know, it is really amazing to see people like, you know, like with the walkaway movement, right? And to see people who were caught up in one, you know, bubble or way of like kind of reinforced belief, completely breaking out of that.
Yeah.
You know, but then it's, you know, where are they walking away to? You know, are they walking into another bubble, or, you know?
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, I've directly observed some people who are part of the walk away movement, and what I've noticed is that they become just as rigid and tribalistic as the people they abhor so much. And it's like, guys, you're fighting fire with fire. I mean, it's not going to work. That there's a reason that metaphor is around, and it's proof of how silly we are as creatures. So I guess the simple fix, even simple doesn't mean easy, by the way. Simple is just like the obvious and simple way of dealing with the first three problems: the liberal push, the conservative nationalist push, and then the fear-based overreaction as a result, is having more open discussion, more people talking, more people, let's say, mindfully, actively listening, as opposed to intensively responding or using snap judgments. So if we can fix that, then maybe it's easier to kind of rein in the politics side of things. But then what do we do for the technology and the news? I mean, I'll say, I hope that mainstream media dies.
Oh, me too. Certainly.
I think that's the solution.
And they are dying. They're in their death throes right now. Well, and that's my concept too. I was just thinking as you were talking, like, what if we didn't have politics?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, well, and could the system exist without politics?
No. And
no?
And the reason I'm being so definitive is I've had a number of discussions in the last couple of years about this. I had a great discussion with this person on Twitter who we even had a Skype chat as a result of how interesting and heated our back and forth got. A kid named Nicholas Blanchard, or an adult. And what I noticed is that if you look at how human systems work in the economic sense, the game theory, evolutionary psychology sense, that we always end up finding groups that somehow collect around principles, values, or interests. And they always have to compete in some reasonable way with either opposing or similar groups for power, time, and energy. So I think we're always going to have some organized system of relating to each other. I don't think it always, I seriously don't believe it needs to be bifurcated. I think the fact that we have a right versus left is absolutely incredulous.
Well, because that's this whole thing of like thinking there's the good and the bad, because that it defies that there is nuance.
Yeah.
You know, so it is amazing. Maybe we're in this time and like, you know, like moving into the golden age, as Scott Adams has talked about, because we are seeing this. We are seeing that the duality is an illusion.
Right.
You know, because it is so nuanced.
And I think that's maybe why, if we could, I'll be arrogant and say, if I could redesign government, it would be you elect people based upon the topics that they have expertise about. Yeah. So you elect senators and Congress people based upon their expertise in economics, their expertise in foreign affairs, their expertise in military, their expertise in, you know, dealing with healthcare, their expertise in dealing with education.
How do we get trust back? trust of our experts, because we're very rapidly losing that. And I mean, that could be a whole nother talk on its own, because I know that's a pretty...
Totally. Yeah.
But we're losing that, right? I mean, even research now, we're like, well, look at those, the Cambridge Analytics and, these things that make us go, wait, maybe these, peer-reviewed studies we've always trusted so much, maybe we've even realized, we can't trust
right.
that too.
Yeah, the replication crisis.
Aren't being trusted, I feel like. But it's also, with that lack of trust, is because so much has come to light.
Sure.
Because it used to be, the doctors are giving you your good drugs, they're helping you, and it's like, oh wait, they're not helping me. They've been poisoning me and, making me sick, or at least the system has.
Right.
Many good intentioned doctors, but.
And that's why I think this social justice movement, the Antifa people, etc., is not all bad, simply because it is showing that there is a need to rebel against the system and the authority that's in charge, because it does get out of control. It does manipulative things. It does cruel things. It does arrogant, greedy things, right? Pharmaceutical companies, medical staff, all that stuff. So there's a necessity for people like that to keep using their voice. I think using violence is awfully stupid and moronic, but...
Well, and they have it directed wrong.
Yeah.
Because they've been deranged. They're not directing like, let's take away the guns, and I'm afraid that the government is a Nazi, just there's so much irony and obviously hypocrisy.
Yeah. And that's how we're all built. But I think we build trust. That's totally a conversation we should have next week or something, because it's a lengthy one. But I think one of the best ways to rebuild trust is to make sure that we start having healthier academic communities, because typically we've gotten our experts from academic institutions, and there's just been this, Jonathan Haidt and all their work. There's just been this collapse for the last 2 decades of our institutions based upon ideology. And that's a problem that I've sort of talked about in some of my work, and everyone is talking about in the academic world. That's why groups like the Heterodox Academy have popped up, so that there can be kind of a more an open-minded diversity of ideas that did not previously exist, or that got lost in the university. But definitely, I think rebuilding, restructuring, and developing confidence in our academic world is going to help.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think if we were to have a positive conversation about how to deal with social media. So if you were to create, based upon your world and how you function in the world, what would be some positive, health-oriented rules about using social media? What would you, if you were to design like a positive-minded relapse prevention plan for managing social media use, what would it be for you?
I think a primary one would be intentional use of social media.
Okay.
Because now with these, right, going to be gone, we have that. It's not intentional, because it becomes a constant stream. But that's also a product of Twitter, these platforms where, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
So it's a really but I think if it's intentional, I sit down and this is the time I, deal with my social media, and also maybe integrity or accountability being utilized more.
How so?
Just people thinking more about what again, it's the intention thing, right? Thinking more about what they're doing on social media. Are they contributing? Are they, or are they just, stoking the fires of division?
Okay. So then I would encapsulate that as making sure you're trying to be mindful when you're using it, maybe secondarily setting a schedule for when you use it, as opposed to just using it kind of ad hoc whenever you want. You can use it maybe only at 5 o'clock, or maybe only for an hour before bed, or only, for an hour in the morning, or something like that, right?
Well, and not carrying, I think a big one is not carrying a phone on you too.
Yeah.
Which will be for me, hopefully, having the non-smartphone, and then having the iPad for, when I'm wanting to, manage business stuff. And I think that so there's physical things we can do like that.
Sure.
Or here's another one for you. You'll laugh probably, but
what's that?
It's a Q-Link. Have you heard of Q-Link?
No, I haven't.
It has some effect on EMFs. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting sports people who endorse it. There was a guy Scotty, who does tech stuff. Was I kind of didn't believe it. He's but I've been wearing it, and it's made a difference in how I feel.
Wow.
I'll try to research it some more but it's meant for like EMFs and tech.
Oh.
Got it today. It's made in Bellevue.
Interesting. Not as well.
To hear. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you, from my personal experience, every morning when I go to the gym before work, my phone's in the locker at the gym because I don't freaking want to deal with it. And I tell you,
You don't listen to music?
No, I mindfully exercise.
You're not listening to music and mindfully exercise?
I don't think so. I think the emotional quality of it kind of distracts.
I get pumped up. It's fun.
So maybe having more of that mindset of like leaving the phone somewhere as opposed to being close to it.
Well, yeah, because I feel like that's this thing where this has become, I mean, really this has changed it, because before we had our computer.
Yeah.
So there was more intention because you were sitting down to use it.
Yeah.
Even to me, something like research, not just social media. And I think you've had this experience too, being that we're investigative minded, to research things. I feel like it's changed where it's like there's such a sporadic that it's not necessarily like, oh, here I've gotten all this information and formulated this solid thing, because it gets scattered. Scattered is a good word for how the phones have made social media, because I think tech and phones can be a really helpful tool, to organize us more, but we're marketed to, and that's the thing too, is all the phones reinforce our habitual use.
Sure. I wonder if maybe part of the mindful technology solution that's positive is eliminating apps that you don't need or that you don't use very much. And I'll give you an example. So there was a client I was meeting with earlier, and she was talking about her, I'm helping her move up the corporate ladder and stuff. And she was commenting about some experiences she had with Facebook. And I helped just, simple exploratory conversation. What's it like with you on Facebook? What do you use it for? How often do you look at it? And she talked about how, on her heads up display on the computer, she gets updates and notifications and stuff. And she was talking about how it was distracting her from something she needed to do. And I asked her how important it was for her to have Facebook and how much she used it for like serious connection with people. And she said, I don't really. I was like, so why do you have it then? And she thought for a second and was like, well, so I could connect to old friends from, where she was on the East Coast. And it's like, don't you have their phone number? She's like, yeah. So then if those connections are really valuable, maybe get them on the phone or FaceTime them. You don't have to passively observe things from their, Facebook. So part of her strategy for being less stressed and less distracted was to actually get rid of Facebook, which I think is going to do wonders for her because, outside of, Facebook bad, there's this problem of we have all these reminders, all these connections to people who are superfluous. If you have a friend from 30 years ago that you still call friend, even though you don't actually talk to them, know them, keep up to date with them, connect with them, spend time with them, but you call them a friend, you're kind of tricking yourself into thinking they're still priority in your world when they're not at all.
Well, it's also an interesting scatter to be like, watching like, oh, what's someone doing in their life? And not to say it's funny because I'm like, look what I cooked, on Instagram. Right. But it's kind of this thing where, and again, that adds more to that scattering of attention, right?
I think one of the best ways to stop scattering is maybe to get rid of unnecessary apps. And then another possibility is going back to, the concept of Dunbar's number is maybe limiting your relationships or maybe reorganizing the way you view importance in your relationships.
Well, because people don't even talk to people. I mean, people literally like, oh, they're in my phone or they're a friend on Facebook, because even off social media, right? It's like, oh, I've got, 500 people in my phone.
Yeah.
And I don't really talk to most of those people. Will I talk to them? Are they, and again, it's clearing that out and really defining like which relationships. I think that's a huge part too, is like, because now I think people don't nourish relationships like they used to, because I think they are spread so thin. What's so-and-so doing today? And this, we only have so much attention, and we only have so much potential for connection in a given day.
Right. I also think because connection is cheap now, the word I would use is cheap. It's like almost free to connect with people because your apps are free. The amount of time it takes to connect with people is so small compared. I mean, it used to be a big deal. One of my favorite Craig Ferguson skits was one he did in one of his stand-up specials where he talked about how hard it is. He said that people aren't really more of an asshole than they used to be. People have always been assholes. It's just that because social media is instantaneous, we don't have to think about it. So it's easy for us to show how much of an asshole we are, and there's no cost to it. But back in the 1400s, you have to, get the parchment and make the paper and then kill the chicken, get the ink and get the feather and then like write it out. And it took like a day to write a letter, like, fuck you. So you just gave up on it because it was so much effort to write someone a letter to tell them to go fuck. But now on social media, you can do that in less than 30 seconds and it's no big deal.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times people have a really, people want to vent because people are frustrated or whatever. Yeah. So I think that's another thing is like, oh, it's easy just to go and,
Yeah. And it's the easy is the problem is we're not designed. I personally, and I argue with people, I don't argue. I discuss this with people like Heather Hang on, maybe a little disagreeable with people like Heather on Twitter. And I'm like, we are really more primitive than this, which means we need to set our expectations back to primitive, not to modern. I think we need to, one of the movements I'd be interested in is how do we make our expectations fit where we're really at, not where society is at, if that makes sense. Yeah. How we're built, less so where we'd like to be or where we delusionally think we are.
Yeah.
Because I think we delusionally believe we're fancy and sophisticated when in reality, we're still pretty primitive creatures.
Basic bitches.
Yes. Whatever that means, I believe you.
I've just been using that lately.
Nice.
We're not basic bitches, but.
No, we're fancy. So yeah, well, was that positive enough? Were we positive enough?
I think so for us.
Given
our analytical minds.
Yeah, but again, I think all the things we've recommended here to maybe make it easier to solve these political, social, interpersonal issues are fairly simple, positive things we can do that there's all sorts of upside for, but it's just so scary to let go of automatic responding, constant connection, constant contact, constant information, all this stuff.
Turn off your notifications.
Yeah, turn off your notifications. It's a good start.
It's a huge start. I mean, really, like now we're ping, 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 ping. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I've had points where I'm like, fuck, because all the like, it depends on the mood I'm in too, but where it's like, trying to have a call or like, it's just funny how much static and chaos there is. I remember I was like, giving my friend a hard time because I'm leaving this like great video of the cat where I'm doing like the talking for the cat. And then she calls and I fucking lose the video. I'm like, fuck, I have this great video and now I lost it, but it's meaningless. It doesn't really fucking matter.
It's just,
maybe that's the thing is focusing on what matters.
And I think adding to that, focusing on what matters might mean focusing more on the here and now people that we have access to, because again, naturally speaking, I think my understanding of the way we're designed is we're really designed to feel more meaning in our connections with people who are right in front of us, less so people who are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing now too. I mean, we have people too, where they don't care about their neighbors or their, people in their surrounding area, and they care more about people in another country.
Totally.
Which is weird. It's a weird mentality. But again, I think this comes down to like the shame issues and other social things that are playing in people's minds.
Yeah. It's scary for us. I mean, it's always been scary for humans to connect with each other. There's always a natural, mild level of anxiety or fear when we meet someone new. I think the problem is about the technology stuff we've been talking about, as well as, the cultural shift towards being more isolated because that's what keeps us safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our goal is to kind of, just like an exposure therapy, just kind of in small, subtle ways, expose ourselves to things that we find unsafe so that we can grow, so that we can develop, better calluses and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good chat.
Always good chat. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and comment. Subscribe if you like.
And remind.
And remind on minds.com. Yes. So we are the Alchemy of the Minds podcast, and you can find us on Minds at Alchemy of the Minds. And yeah, have a good rest of your Saturday. We will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.